The Orlando Magic have had a good start to the year, to say the least. That is, despite the universe seemingly trying to derail them. As a young, small-market team that's hungry for success, they've been largely ignored by the NBA with just a handful of televised games. That, along with no one outside of Magic-dedicated podcasts really talking about them, and a laundry list of injury issues, they kind of tend to fly under the radar. This young team has been likened to the Thunder, just not as far ahead as schedule. They seem to be missing that superstar that brings everything together. Or at least that's what the general consensus wants you to think. All of this being said, they have managed to claw their way into the playoff conversation consistently this year, usually sitting around the 4 to 6 seed. All of this is done on the back of a strong defensive effort helmed by Paolo Banchero, Jalen Suggs, and Goga Bitadze, along with Anthony Black, the rookie, stepping up. So all of this begs the question, are the Orlando Magic good? Are they playoff good? And if they are, where do they fit in the East? The Magic are fascinating to me. They're like the anti-Pacers. They're all defense and no offense. Well, okay, in terms of points and shooting efficiency, the Magic are in the bottom half of the league, so that's not like the worst thing ever. But at least at the time of writing, the Magic do sit in the 4th spot on the highest ranked defensive teams in the league. All of this is in the context of how many injuries the Magic have had this year, and, well, it just makes it all that much more impressive. We've seen a lot of key guys go down for extended periods of time, like Markelle Fultz, Wendell Carter Jr., Gary Harris, and Franz Wagner. Then, of course, Johnathan Issac, Joe Ingles, and Cole Anthony have missed time. All these injuries have led to people like Goga Bitadze, Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black, and Paolo Banchero to step up, with Paolo even taking his first few steps towards all-stardom. And what makes all of this even more impressive is that with some of these injuries, the Magic have managed to pull off impressive wins over the Bucks, Pacers, Nuggets, Celtics, and Cavs. Now, of course, they've traded a few in some of those series, but regardless, those are solid, good quality wins. All that being said, though, they do tend to have some tough times with their in-state rival, the Miami Heat, but, of course, to be fair, they're not alone in that. So let's dive into the normal starters to help paint a picture of what this team considers its normal. Coming in at point guard, normally, is number 20 Markelle Fultz, the number 1 overall draft pick from 2017, going to the Philadelphia 76ers. Now obviously Markelle is no longer with the 76ers, and he's had a rocky NBA career laden with injuries. It's a very interesting story that you can find other videos here on YouTube talking about. But it's safe to say his time with the Magic has been special, and generally it seems like he has found a home in Orlando. He's still not what you'd expect from a number 1 draft pick, though. Sure, he's a solid ball handler, he can run an offense well, he can pull off some pretty intricate passes, but he's only a middling at best, but like barely passable shooter. He's been shooting around the 50% mark from the field this year, but fell to only 20% from 3, down from last year's 31%. Now next to Markelle is the shooting guard role, going to number 4, Jalen Suggs, one of the main dudes that's been holding it down this year during this difficult injury-laden stretch. While he's not known as a shooter, year over year he has gotten better, bringing his field goal percentage up to just over 44% and his 3 rate to 38% this year on 4 attempts a game. Although, his strongest point is his defense. Don't get it twisted. He is part of the defensive wall that is Paolo, Goga, and himself. And those 3, along with help from Anthony Black and a few others, have managed to hold off some pretty difficult teams this year when most of the roster was out. Next, we have number 22, Franz Wagner. And, well, him and his brother did compete in FIBA this year. Franz was injured for portions of that and has had injury issues this year. While Mo has not had these issues, he also plays significantly fewer minutes, so take that as you will. People were a little concerned that Franz has maybe regressed a little bit this year, that maybe FIBA hurt him, falling from 36% from 3 last year to just 31% this year. Now, of course, injuries have happened and the season's not over, so there's time for that to balance out, but there is still concern considering Franz is one of the better three-point shooters on the team. That being said, his rebounds and assists have gone up a little bit, so it's not all bad. Now on to the guy you've been waiting for. Drum roll, please. The big star of the Orlando Magic, Goga Bitadze. Okay, now I'm just kidding. Sorry, Magic fans. I know you're probably upset now. It's, of course, Rookie of the Year and number 1 pick from 2022, number 5, Paolo Banchero. Paolo's been challenged this year, really stepping into that leadership role, being the star on this team, and getting them through this really challenging portion of the year. All these injury issues hitting the roster, some really tough games, but still holding down a winning season. He's putting in on average 35 minutes a night, and he seems to be adjusting to it just fine. He's playing and hasn't had any real major injury issues and doesn't look gassed in fourth quarters. Yeah, I mean, during this time, the Magic fell from 4th seed in the East to, well, just the play-in, and they're still kind of in that contention, but it's kind of hard to say if they can really climb back up to the 4th seed, being currently in 8th seed. But that being said, he's kept the team in kind of the playoff conversation and has increased almost every counting stat from last year, which, mind you, was his Rookie of the Year season. So needless to say, he has made some waves in the media. All this on top of an all-star appearance is, well, pretty special. Lastly, the final part of the starting lineup is a little confusing because it's either Goga Bitadze, who was filling in for Wendell Carter Jr. before he got hurt, or it's Wendell Carter Jr., who has kind of taken the spot back post-injury, but are roughly around the same number of starts. So who knows really how this goes? Probably moving forward, it's still Wendell Carter Jr., but we'll go with Goga Bitadze because he's kind of been the bigger name this year. So number 35, Goga Bitadze plays center when Wendell Carter Jr. is not available. And Goga is kind of the conversation of this year because he shocked a ton of people. He only had 1 start last year and played only 17 games last year. So to start this many and perform to such a level, people just didn't expect it. They're like, oh, well, this is a rough stretch for us, but he really stepped up. He improved pretty much every basic counting stat you can, and well, he's kind of fighting Wendell Carter Jr. back and forth for the starting role and hasn't really gotten back to that. It's still incredibly impressive that he was able to, along with Paolo and Jalen Suggs, hold the ship steady while these injuries were occurring. Now, with all these injuries, the starting lineup and the bench have gotten really blurred. Because so many people have missed so much time that, like, the number of starts are kind of comparable. So I'll try to make note of when someone's had quite a few starts. But moving on to the bench, probably the most other surprising guy would be rookie number 0 Anthony Black, who has started 29 games this season so far. As a rookie, he's come in and done a pretty good job. He's done what a lot of people expected him to and been a big defensive guy. He works within a good team defense. Now, his shot is still kind of working its way into the NBA, but he could be kind of the future guard of this Orlando Magic team. Which is saying something as a rookie because this team has quite a few guards who are quite notable. We'll talk about Cole Anthony later, but we've already talked about Markelle Fultz, a number 1 draft pick, who, of course, is not exactly what you'd expect, and Jalen Suggs. So, needless to say, he's done a good job with the minutes he's been given. Now, the other rookie we haven't really seen all that much this year is Jett Howard, because he's been getting run with the G League affiliate and doing a phenomenal job. So fingers crossed we see him a little bit more down the stretch this year. Now on to the man I mentioned earlier, Cole Anthony. And from what I gather, my purely vibes-based observation, him and Mo Wagner are kind of like the hearts of this team, or just the vibe machines, if you will, on and off the court. So these guys, outside of their play, are really important to the fabric of this team. And Cole may be a small guard. He's only 6'2", but he's got a really, really good handle, and he's quick. And we can't forget about number 21, Moritz Wagner, the brother of Franz Wagner that I've mentioned a couple of different times already in this video. He's been in the league since the 18-19 season, has played for a few different teams, notably the Lakers, the Wizards, and the Celtics, before landing in Orlando. As the backup center, Moritz actually has gotten quite a bit of run this year because, well, Goga still needed a backup when Wendell Carter Jr. was out, and now he's kind of cemented his place in kind of a regular rotation. He has had some injury issues like pretty much everyone else on this team in the past, but he has pretty consistently played throughout the season and increased his shooting capability from both the floor and, to an extent, from three. Now, we also have Johnathan Issac, who has struggled to be healthy his entire career. Since being drafted 6th back in 2017 by the Magic, he's only played one season with more than 34 games. Which, oddly enough, that season was 75 games back in the 18-19 season, so it seems kind of feast or famine when you're looking at Johnathan Issac here. And that brings us to Gary Harris, a guard that's known for his three-point shot. And while that has fallen this year, probably due to injury, there's hope that he'll get back over the 40% mark on 4 attempts a game relatively soon. Also down with injuries this year would be starting center Wendell Carter Jr., who I mentioned earlier. And while he does have a history of short seasons, playing a max of 62 games back in the 21-22 season, he has done some impressive stuff on his comeback this year. He can shoot the three fairly consistently, and he's done some, we'll say, pretty solid-looking blocks. The next name on the list would be that of Joe Ingles, who has also been out with injuries this year. As I said, a lot of injuries on this team. But not as long as some of those other injuries. Joe's provided some veteran presence for this relatively young team, and he's a pretty good catch-and-shoot three-point shooter off of the bench, averaging 42% from three on nearly 3 attempts a game. Next, we have Caleb Houston, a second-year guy currently shooting 37% from three. Rounding out the semi-regular rotation would be Chuma Okeke and two-way contract guy Trevelyan Queen. The Magic have also 2 other two-way contracts with Kevon Harris and Admiral Schofield. However, we haven't really seen a lot of them this season. So without injuries, this team's actually pretty solid. However, Paolo and Franz aside, there's not a lot of guys that get a lot of star recognition. Even with Goga, Anthony Black, and Jalen Suggs stepping up, the team has been in a really tight race in kind of the middle of the East. Now on to the coaching staff led by that of Jamal Mosley, a real player's coach. Or rather, a player that turned coach. After a career playing abroad, Mosley would come back to the States to work his way through the coaching structure of teams such as the Denver Nuggets, Cleveland Cavaliers, and Dallas Mavericks, before landing the head coaching gig with the Magic. All of this, and he's just 45 years old. So with a younger team like this, you often see him interacting with players in a much more friendly, near-peer role almost, than you see some of the older, more tenured coaches on other teams would. And kind of a weird callback to the Thunder episode, where I talked about Mark Daignault having really interesting, insightful things to say, like the whole artists versus scientists thing when breaking down players. And that kind of applies to Jamal Mosley as well. I mean, listening to him speak in post games, he's what I would call an artist. He's much more about the technical side of looking at an individual and their play versus an overall conceptual view and kind of like a strategic approach. One of the lines that Coach Mose likes to use is, "This team is done by committee," really emphasizing that the players are leading the team, he's just kind of guiding them as needed. It all goes back to being a player's coach. He trusts his team and, well, they trust him. Now on to the organization and its president, Jeff Weltman. Weltman would take the reins back in 2017, looking to right the ship after half a decade of playoff misses. This process would start with drafting Johnathan Issac, who, despite his injury history, has stayed on the roster. We'd also see Markelle Fultz come through via trade in 2019, and 2021 be the most drastic year as we see Nikola Vucevic, Evan Fournier, and Aaron Gordon get traded. This would help bring in some picks along with Gary Harris and Wendell Carter Jr., among other players. We'd also see Franz Wagner and Jalen Suggs join the crew in that year's draft. That brings us to 2022 and the number 1 overall pick that the Orlando Magic used to select Paolo Banchero out of Duke. While Paolo would win the Rookie of the Year award in 2022, the team would miss the playoffs, finishing 34-48. While the front office hasn't made any big trades in the recent years and didn't do anything at this trade deadline, it is interesting to see and kind of guess what the Magic will intend to do with Markelle Fultz, especially now that Anthony Black has started and been successful with this current team. So with the front office looking towards the future, a player's coach, and a lot of young talent, where does this version of the Magic fall? Well, of course, this team in particular is primarily based around injuries. But if Paolo, Jalen Suggs, and Goga can shoulder the load, this team has a really good chance to stay in the play-in, if not break the playoffs. If either Anthony Black or Jet Howard make a lot of progress in the rest of the season, or Markelle Fultz, Franz Wagner, Johnathan Issac, and Wendell Carter can fully recover and stay that way, this team could make a solid run into the playoffs either through the play-in or actually making it into the playoffs. So are they good? Well, yes. Will they be good in the future? Also yes. But where do they fit in the East? With this core and being relatively young, well, who knows? But if all holds well and no major injuries, fingers crossed, derail them, they could potentially get back to like the 7-6-ish area. But anything can happen, and post-trade deadline, even more so. So I'll leave you with this. This team being run by committee is an entirely different approach to what we see on these star-laden teams. In interviews, Paolo has talked about the difficulties of stepping into that leadership role and being vocal, because that's not really his natural state. But he has made big splashes this year and could be one of the future perennial all-stars we talk about for the next decade.